Something happened the last time they hurt you, but you didn't even realize it at first. No screams, no dramatic goodbye, no doors slamming, just a subtle shift in the atmosphere. Something only heaven could orchestrate. While they thought it was just another day to push your limits, to dismiss your worth, to steal a little more of your peace, something divine was unfolding in the background. Because while they were still playing games, God made a decision. And when God decides it's the last time, it is. No second warnings, no drawn-out warnings, no explanations, just judgment, quiet and absolute. They didn't know it would be the last time they'd ever get access to your soul, the last time they'd manipulate your kindness, the last time they'd exploit your silence. Because something holy rose up inside you, not from anger, not from pride, but from a divine intervention that said, "This ends now." You're not watching this by accident. You're watching because something inside you knows. That moment was different. You're about to find out why, and more importantly, how God made sure they'd never get the chance to hurt you again. 1. God closes the door, and this time they can't reopen it. They didn't know it was the last time, the last insult, the last manipulation, the last cold stare designed to make you feel small. To them, it was just another ordinary moment of control, another reminder that they believed your patience had no boundaries. They assumed you'd stay, again, bend, again, forgive, again. What they didn't know was that God had already made his decision, and when God acts, there's no warning shot, there's just silence and finality. See, most people expect God's judgment to come with thunder and fire, but often it arrives in quiet form, a closing, a lifting, a shift so subtle you can barely explain it. One day you just feel it. The weight of the relationship no longer feels sacred. The emotional pull no longer tugs. The familiar guilt no longer binds you to the dysfunction. And you don't leave out of bitterness. You leave out of obedience. This is where divine intervention begins, not in explosive escape, but in the unexplainable grace to walk away without needing permission or understanding. Because there comes a moment where God's mercy toward you overrides the access others once had to you. And when he shuts that door, it's not symbolic, it's spiritual, it's complete. You might not have recognized it as holy in the moment. You might have doubted yourself, questioned whether you were being too harsh, too distant, too unforgiving. But it wasn't your heart turning cold, it was God guarding it. It wasn't your love dying, it was your discernment awakening. You were no longer operating from emotion, but from revelation. The Spirit was quietly whispering, "You've suffered enough. Now walk out. I've already gone before you." And the narcissist? They didn't feel the shift. They couldn't. Their entire identity relies on the illusion that the cycle never ends. They believe they own your empathy, that your silence equals submission, that the door will always be left ajar, just enough for them to slither back through. But this time, something was different. Not on the outside, but in the depths of your soul. Because God didn't just help you see clearly, he severed what you couldn't. He cut the invisible threads of trauma bonding and emotional captivity. He broke the chain that had you second-guessing your own clarity. He didn't just ask you to let go. He empowered you to. And when God empowers a release, there is no going back. Not for you, not for them. That's why they seem more confused now than ever before. Their tactics no longer work. Their words feel empty. Their attempts at guilt, charm, or sudden repentance don't stir you. It's not that you're bitter. It's that you're spiritually sealed off from the storm you used to live in. You've been moved into a place they cannot follow, a place covered by God's hand and reserved for your healing. You may still feel echoes of pain. That's normal. You may grieve the version of you who kept trying, who kept hoping, who believed they'd change. And yet, in that grief, there's something new, a strange, unexpected peace, a calm that doesn't need answers, a stillness that doesn't require closure, a sense of finality that isn't forged by human will, but by divine authority. Make no mistake, God closes doors not just to protect your heart from future harm, but to preserve the calling on your life, because He knows what you could not, that their access to you was costing more than your emotions. It was draining your spiritual energy, blinding your discernment, weakening your witness. And so, in mercy, He stepped in and sealed what you could not. They will likely try again. Whether weeks, months, or even years later, they may circle back, acting new, reformed, aware. But the door they once walked through is no longer available. Because the door wasn't just emotional, it was sacred. It was opened by grace and closed by holiness. And here's what the narcissist will never understand. They didn't lose access to you because you grew colder. They lost access because God reclaimed what was His. You are not available for manipulation anymore. Not because you finally had enough, but because God decided enough had been done. That last moment they hurt you, it didn't pass unnoticed in heaven. It was the moment the judge of all things stood up and said, "No more. This one belongs to me." So if you still feel guilt for walking away, release it. If you still wonder whether you were being too dramatic, let it go. If you're questioning whether you did the right thing, remember this. You didn't close the door. God did. And when He closes a door, it's not rejection, it's redemption. You are not where you used to be, not just emotionally, but spiritually. The room is different now. The air is different. The silence is holy. And the future that awaits you? It no longer includes the people God has intentionally excluded. Let them knock. Let them wonder. Let them spin their stories. The door isn't just locked. It's gone. Because when heaven acts, it doesn't leave a way back to what it just saved you from. 2. God pulls off the mask, and you can't unsee what He shows you. One of the most painful mercies God ever gives is clarity. It doesn't always feel like a gift at first. In fact, it can feel like heartbreak all over again, just in a new language. It's the moment when God pulls back the veil, and you finally see the person you were entangled with for who they truly are. Not who you hoped they would become. Not who they pretended to be when people were watching. Not who they temporarily morphed into when you were ready to walk away. No, you see them in full, in the light of truth, and it stuns you. You thought you knew them. You believed the version they presented. You believed the apologies, the explanations, the childhood trauma stories, the "I just didn't know better" excuses. You believed because you loved. But God didn't let you stay blind forever. He saw how the enemy was using that false image to keep you trapped in an emotional illusion. So God did what only He can do. He shattered the mask. And once the mask is gone, it cannot be put back together. Suddenly, every moment that once confused you begins to make sense. You replay the conversations and realize how skillfully they deflected blame. You remember the apologies and realize they were only offered to reset the cycle, not to bring real change. You see how your kindness was weaponized, how your loyalty was assumed, how your deep belief in redemption was used against you. And that's when it hits you. This wasn't just dysfunction. God didn't show you the truth to make you bitter. He showed you because He loves you. Because He knew that if you kept believing the illusion, you'd keep betraying yourself in the name of compassion, and He never designed your heart to be trampled in the name of grace. Yes, we are called to love. Yes, we are called to forgive. But we are never called to stay yoked to darkness disguised as light. That's not mercy, that's bondage. And God came to set the captives free, especially those who didn't even know they were in chains. The narcissist never expected you to wake up. They had rehearsed their roles so well that they assumed you would always buy the performance. They believed the script was foolproof. But what they didn't anticipate was God handing you a new lens. A spiritual one that sees through surface-level words and feels what's really behind the smile, one that no longer responds to manipulation with empathy but with discernment. That lens, that anointing to see clearly, is not something you can remove once it's been given. And it doesn't stop with them. Once God activates your discernment, it ripples outward. You begin to see differently in every area of your life. Family, friendships, even the internal lies you used to tell yourself. That's why this season feels so lonely sometimes, because when God shows you truth, He also shows you distance. He pulls you out of old agreements, old illusions, old emotional dependencies, and in that space, He begins to reintroduce you to you, the version of you that's no longer asleep to dysfunction. But there's something holy in that awakening, something sacred in seeing without denial. It hurts, yes, it shakes you, but it also anchors you. It gives you language for wounds you couldn't name before. It gives you permission to stop fighting for something that was never rooted in love to begin with. And it gives you the strength to answer a higher calling, the call to protect your peace, your purpose, and your prophetic destiny. Because once you see clearly, you can no longer pretend you don't. And once God reveals, you are now responsible, not to fix them, but to walk in the light He gave you, to walk away from the performance and into your healing, to honor the truth even when it breaks your heart, to release the idol of potential and embrace the reality of who they've chosen to be. And that is one of the most mature and holy things you'll ever do. So if you're in that place right now, where things you once called love now look like manipulation, where charm starts to feel like control, where grace begins to feel like emotional exhaustion, I want you to know something. You are not crazy. You are waking up. And that's exactly what the enemy feared most. The narcissist wore a mask, but God just handed you the mirror. You're not meant to return to the lie. You're meant to step into the truth, even if it costs you comfort, familiarity, or connection. Because the moment you honor the truth, you create room for God to rebuild something real. If you've ever had God open your eyes to a truth that broke you, but ultimately saved you, comment below with the words, "I see now." Let that be your public declaration of a private awakening. 3. God lets you taste peace, so you'll never settle for chaos again. It doesn't always happen with fireworks. Sometimes it's in the smallest, quietest moments, the kind you don't realize are holy until you look back and weep. After the confusion, after the gaslighting, after the endless internal wrestling of, is it me, or is it really this bad? God steps in and lets you taste something you forgot you were allowed to want. Peace. Not just a lack of conflict, not just a day without drama, but peace that settles in your chest like still water. Peace that doesn't require explanation or performance. Peace that allows you to breathe again in your own skin. It arrives unexpectedly, maybe in the quiet of an afternoon when no one is yelling, no one is twisting your words, no one is making you feel like your faith makes you difficult to love, or maybe it shows up in a moment where you realized you didn't flinch when the phone buzzed, you didn't brace yourself for the mood swings, you weren't holding your breath waiting for the next shift in tone. That's not coincidence. That's God letting you experience what freedom feels like. Because for so long you were conditioned to chaos, not by choice, but by survival. You became so used to the roller coaster that stillness felt suspicious. You didn't trust peace because you never tasted it in purity. You associated it with the calm before the storm, with walking on eggshells, with temporary ceasefires before the next explosion. But God doesn't deal in artificial calm. When He brings peace, it's not the absence of conflict. It's the presence of Himself. And He brings it intentionally. He gives you a glimpse of what life looks like outside the emotional wilderness, a preview of what your soul has been craving but too weary to pursue, that small, sacred moment where you feel safe just being you. No armor, no mask, no need to walk on emotional landmines. That's when the Holy Spirit begins to whisper something revolutionary. You were never created for chaos, you just adapted to it. That realization is both healing and heartbreaking. Healing because it gives you permission to stop calling dysfunction normal. Heartbreaking because it forces you to confront how long you've lived in survival mode. How long you mistook tension for passion, how often you confused emotional intensity with intimacy. But God, in His mercy, doesn't leave you in the ache of that awareness. He invites you into something deeper, a life marked by quiet strength, stable joy, and unshakable stillness. This is why so many don't understand your detachment, why even you at times feel strange for not responding to the same emotional triggers. You've tasted something better, and once you've tasted holy peace, you lose your appetite for the counterfeit. The narcissist doesn't understand that. They think you're bored, numb, distant. What they don't realize is that your spirit has matured. You no longer crave the highs and lows of toxic love. You no longer find identity in trying to fix it, make it work, or prove your worth. You've stepped out of emotional addiction and into spiritual alignment. This peace, this God-given rest, is not a luxury. It is your inheritance. And once God gives you even the smallest taste of it, something in your soul awakens. You begin to realize that the emotional intensity you once endured was not love. It was bondage dressed up as loyalty. You see that your capacity to endure pain was never meant to be the foundation of a relationship, that being the strong one was never supposed to be your spiritual identity. And as that truth settles in, you stop apologizing for your boundaries. You stop defending your distance. You stop feeling guilty for walking away from what once drained you. Because now you know, not in theory, but in your bones, that God did not create you to live in a state of constant emotional emergency. He is not the author of confusion. He is the Prince of Peace. And when His peace comes upon your life, it realigns everything. The voices that once tormented you begin to fade. The pressure to perform falls away. The compulsion to explain yourself disappears. You don't need to be understood anymore. You just need to stay free. And so you do. You walk in the stillness. You guard it. You prioritize it. Not because you're selfish or hardened, but because now you know the cost of trading peace for chaos. And you refuse to go back to what nearly killed your spirit, just to keep someone else comfortable. This peace is not shallow. It is born in battle. It is the reward for the war you didn't think you'd survive. It is the resting place of those who have chosen to live in truth, no matter the loneliness, the questions, or the loss that came with it. God didn't just give you peace. He taught you how to crave it, and in doing so, He rewired your soul to never again confuse chaos with connection. You are not numb, you are not cold, you are finally calm, and that is sacred. For God turns their manipulation into exposure. They didn't just manipulate you, they manipulated your mercy. That was the real violation. They saw your willingness to forgive as weakness. They used your compassion like a weapon against you. Every time you gave them the benefit of the doubt, they took it as a sign they had more room to twist the truth, stretch the facts, and paint themselves as the victim. But what they didn't know, what they could never see coming, is that God was documenting everything. Not one lie went unnoticed, not one passive-aggressive jab, one slanderous whisper, one calculated silence escaped his gaze. While they were perfecting their performance, convincing others that you were the unstable one, the dramatic one, the problem, God was preparing a stage for revelation, not yours, theirs, because eventually God flips the script. At first, it may seem like they're still in control. They continue manipulating conversations, changing narratives, gaslighting facts. They seem so sure of themselves, almost untouchable. But that's exactly how deception works. It hides in overconfidence. It thrives in appearances. But appearances are fragile, and God is not interested in appearances. He deals in truth. So, He lets them dig their own grave with their own words. He lets them get comfortable, careless even. He allows their arrogance to swell just long enough to reveal what's been festering beneath the surface. And just when they think they've successfully destroyed your credibility, isolated you, and cemented their control, the unraveling begins. At first, it starts subtly. People around them begin to notice the inconsistencies. Their stories stop adding up. Their anger becomes harder to hide. Their cruelty, once veiled in charm, starts to leak out at the edges. Then it escalates. The people they manipulated begin comparing notes. The lies become harder to maintain. Their carefully constructed image begins to crack, and they can't stop it. That's the justice of God. Not always swift, not always loud, but always complete. He doesn't just rescue you, He reveals them, and it's not to humiliate them, it's to protect His child, to make sure no one else falls into the same web of manipulation, to ensure that the enemy doesn't continue masquerading as light while destroying lives in the dark. And here's what's so profound. You don't have to lift a finger. You don't have to expose them. You don't have to convince anyone. God does it for you. Your stillness becomes a witness. Your peace becomes your protest. While they're scrambling to maintain the illusion, you're simply walking in integrity, and that becomes their undoing. The narcissist will likely panic. They'll accuse you of revenge. They'll say you turned people against them. But in reality, you did nothing but let God be God. And God has a way of making hidden things plain, not to destroy, but to reveal what was never going to heal. There is no manipulation clever enough to outrun divine timing, no false narrative powerful enough to outmaneuver God's justice. And when He exposes, He doesn't just uncover facts, He exposes spirit, the heart, the intent, the root. What was once denied becomes undeniable. What was once praised begins questioned. What was once protected begins to crumble, and not because of vengeance, but because of truth. And you, who once felt powerless under their grip, begin to feel the quiet vindication of knowing it wasn't just me. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't overreacting. God saw it, and He's bringing it into the light. This is why their tricks stop working, why their charm falls flat, why the guilt trips don't land like they used to. Because the Spirit of God is now your covering, and when truth covers you, deception can no longer manipulate you. You no longer feel the need to defend yourself. You don't crave revenge. You've tasted something higher than vindication. You've tasted freedom. And freedom doesn't shout. It doesn't chase. It doesn't prove. It simply stands. In light, in peace, in power. That's what terrifies them. Not your anger, not your silence, but your peace. Because peace means you're no longer tangled in the web, and without that entanglement, their power dissolves. So let the exposure unfold. Let the light shine. Let the unraveling happen. You don't have to control the outcome. God already has. And what he's uncovering isn't just the narcissist's intentions, it's your worth. The worth that was buried under layers of confusion. The worth that was dimmed by years of gaslighting and shame. The worth that can now be seen, not just by others, but by you. Because the truth was never meant to destroy you, it was meant to deliver you. 5. God elevates you into a realm they can't access. There is a level of healing that isn't visible on the outside, but in the spirit it shakes the atmosphere. It's not loud, it doesn't make a grand announcement, but it is undeniable one day. After all the breakdowns, the weeping, the confusion, and the long nights of asking God, why did they treat me like this? What did I do wrong? You find yourself in a different space. Emotionally, spiritually, and energetically, you are no longer where you used to be. You're standing in a realm they can't touch. At first, you don't even recognize that it's elevation. It feels too quiet, too unfamiliar. There's no applause, no congratulations, just you, God, and the air up here, thin, clean, and holy. But as you sit in it, you start to feel the weight lift. You start to notice how light your spirit becomes when you're no longer tethered to someone else's dysfunction. And that's when you realize God didn't just rescue you. This is what the narcissist never saw coming. They thought your worth was tied to how well you served them. They thought your strength was something they could harvest and use for their own gain. But when God promoted you spiritually, He didn't just elevate you. He made you invisible to the enemy's access, not physically, but spiritually. The narcissist may still know your name, remember your patterns, try their old games, but the version of you they once manipulated is no longer available. She's gone. He's grown. The soul that once craved their approval is now saturated with something higher, the affirmation of heaven. This is where it gets holy, because God doesn't just lift you away from them, He lifts you above them. And this isn't about ego. It's about alignment. You no longer resonate with their chaos. Their energy no longer enters your field. Their words don't carry the same weight. They try to provoke, but the hooks don't land. The bait doesn't tempt. The cycle no longer spins. Why? Because you're not orbiting their world anymore. You're seated in a different dimension, one of discernment, clarity, peace, and purpose. And in this new space, you begin to see things differently. You begin to see you differently. Not as the broken version of yourself who tolerated the abuse, but as the healed, restored, divinely loved child of God who survived it and came out stronger. The narcissist can't follow you here, not because they don't want to, but because God won't allow them. This level of grace is gated, not out of cruelty, but out of protection. The doors that open for you in this realm were paid for in tears, in obedience, in sacrifice, in the crushing that took place in the wilderness when no one was watching. It was there, in the desert of emotional depletion, that God began the lifting, not outward, but inward. He didn't elevate your name first, He elevated your spirit. And because of that, you now live in a place that doesn't run on performance. You don't strive to prove anymore. You don't over-explain. You don't beg for understanding. You don't argue to be believed. That season is over. You are no longer trying to be heard by people who were never sent to hear you. You are walking with God, not as a servant begging for scraps of love from broken people, but as a beloved child who knows the Father will never ask you to sacrifice your soul for someone else's comfort. And this knowledge becomes your elevation, not just in your career, your environment, or your relationships, but in how you carry yourself, in how you pray, in how you protect your time, your spirit, your space. The elevation is not for show, it's for sustainability, and God ordained it that way. You're not above them in pride, you're above them in perspective. You no longer need their reaction to validate your decision. You don't need their understanding to confirm your growth. They could never give you that anyway, because their perception of you was always based on control, not connection. And when control ends, so does their access. So let them say what they will, let them spin their narratives, let them pretend they never meant to harm you. You don't have to defend your peace, you just have to protect it. You've come too far, healed too deeply, and walked through too much fire to return to something God has already lifted you out of. Take the road and the farm, and here it is, on and. This realm you're in now, it's not just safer, it's sacred. You are not who you were, and they are no longer invited. Not because you hate them, but because God loves you too much to let you regress. When He elevates, He doesn't just move you higher, He changes the atmosphere around you. The ground you walk on, the people you attract, the thoughts you entertain, the prayers you pray, they all begin to align with a higher frequency, one that cannot be accessed by manipulation, deception, or emotional blackmail. You are now covered, not by your strength, but by God's sovereign hand, and that covering cannot be breached. You are now covered, not by your strength, but by God's sovereign hand, and that covering cannot be breached. If this message reached into a place you couldn't quite name, if it reminded you of your worth, your growth, or your God, and you feel led to help keep this space alive for others still walking through their own valley, your quiet support is deeply felt. No pressure, just presence, just grace. Thank you for being part of something sacred.